We're not out there fighting anything other than crime.
We see stuff that nobody should have to see.
Put your hands back! Hands back! Hands back! Go!
Get out of it, Mel. Get out of it! Get out of it!
Don't move! Don't move!
Okay. George 31, erect out.
Don't go!
Put it in paper. You're going to jail. Where else do you think you're going?
You're listening to The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. Sorry about that. We were having some technological difficulties, so we were walking the guests through that. Again, it happens from time to time. That's okay. So we're slightly tardy in starting the show, but nevertheless, hey, listen, we call that for a Friday fashionably late. And with tonight's guest, it doesn't matter. We're going to have a great conversation. He's done a whole heck of a lot, so I look forward to it. And welcome back on that note to episode 365 of the Mike the New Haven podcast for what will be volume 18 of the Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. It's been a busy week for the show. Monday, of course, was volume 17, paying tribute to our late friend Miles' son. And Wednesday was a doubleheader. Hadn't done one of those in a bit. Boomer Esiason, host of Boomer and Geo on WFAN for the morning cap, and then for the night cap, Lieutenant Mickey Farrell of the New York City Fire Department for another volume 71 of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. Hello to all you tuning in across the board. We're live right now on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and of course, Twitter, X, whatever you call it these days. We won't keep our guests waiting long. Good to see everybody in the chat as always. But first, a word from the Ryan Investigative Group. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast. And as noted before, if you have any desire, let's say you have a business of your own and you know somebody else who does, that'd like to partner with the program, we're more than eager to have more sponsors on the program. Billy Ryan's getting lonely, so if you want to keep him company, by all means, reach out to us. We'll be happy to have you on board. All right, my next guest is a retired FBI supervisory special agent whose career spanned just about 30 years inside the Bureau's largest field office, that, of course, of the FBI, like I mentioned, in New York. From investigating domestic terrorism and organized crime to serving as the face of the Bureau as its spokesman for quite a number of years during some very high-profile incidents, he was a trusted voice both inside and outside of the Bureau. And after he retired from the FBI, he brought that same credibility and insight to WNBC locally as an investigative producer and reporter. And that, for this volume 18 of the Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide, is retired FBI agent Joe Valiquette, a man who I found out about, as I mentioned to you, Joe, when we first talked through the columns of my late friend, Lenny Levitt.
Right. Lenny and I go way back. Sadly, he passed away a few years ago.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I used to work with him, I guess, when he was at Newsday. And I mean, he was always, I forget the name of his column, but he was
One
always
Police Plaza.
Right. Yeah. He was always kind of edgy a little bit, but he was always fair. And that's what I appreciated.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely missed. And I had the good fortune of having him on the program quite a number of years ago during the program's early days. That was episode 26, if you want to go back and listen to it. So what's interesting about you, for a guy that spent so much of his time and is still in the New York area, even in retirement, you know, we'll forgive you. You're originally from Boston and you're a Red Sox fan, but that's okay. You know, listen, we'll forgive you. It's fine.
Do you know how difficult it is to live for almost 50 years
Yes.
In the New York area as a Red Sox fan? The first 25 years were kind of tough, but once we hit the new century, I have to say it got a lot easier once the Red Sox started winning World Series to the chagrin of the Yankees.
I know. Well, they've been the better run franchise. You know, listen, they've had 4 championships this century to the Yankees 1. And even with the turnover in management and different ownership, even over the years, I always say, especially as I look at Brian Cashman and Aaron Boone these days, I'm like, they don't hang banners for stability. You know, even if there's chaos in between, if you're hanging banners, you're doing something right. But we won't talk about that because I don't want my blood pressure to rise.
Okay.
on the New Haven podcast. But just tell me about growing up, nevertheless, in the Boston area during those early years. And, from the looks of it, you originally had an interest in law before you went into law enforcement.
Right. Well, I had I graduated from Boston College in 1971, a long time ago, with a bachelor's degree in it was a liberal arts degree, and I just kind of thought I would go in and become an attorney, and so I applied to various law schools and wound up at another Jesuit school, St. Louis University School of Law, in St. Louis, Missouri, and graduated from there in 1974. And came back home, took the Massachusetts bar exam twice. I failed it the first time, as many of us do, and but the second time was the charm. And it was in the process. I was in the process of sending out resumes to various law firms basically in the Boston metropolitan area, when a friend of mine who worked in the federal government said, why don't you come down to Washington and make the rounds of the various agencies down there, including the FBI. So I did that. And I went into the Justice Department. And in those days, you could just walk into the Justice Department building and without security or anything. And I got an application and filled it out. And lo and behold, a few months later, I got this call saying, can you be at Quantico in 2 weeks? And so I thought it over for about 5 minutes and said yes. And so then I went to Quantico in early 1975 and spent 4 months there for the academy training and was assigned to New York after that.
So before I get to being assigned to the field office in New York, of course, and we're talking with Joe Valiquette here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. If you got a question for Joe, fire away in the chat. As always, you guys know the drill by now. Just tell me I don't know what it consists of today, but back then in Quantico, what did the training consist of?
Well, it's pretty much the same today. I mean, obviously they tweak it a bit, given the changing crime environment. But basically, a third of the time is classroom training, basically getting familiar with the FBI and Justice Department guidelines and criminal procedures and that kind of thing, the various statutes that the FBI has jurisdiction over. Another third is firearms training. There's a lot of firearms training out on the range with shotguns and automatic weapons and what have you. And then the third, I'd say the next third is the final third is physical training in the gym. And that's getting in shape, but also doing defensive tactics, learning how to take down a recalcitrant arrestee and handcuffing and that kind of thing. But there are also, during the course of the 4 months, there are also practical problems scenarios that the agent trainees run through. The Quantico over the years has built a very elaborate mock town with a movie theater and a drugstore and a gambling casino and all these kinds of things. And on any given day, you'll see a class of new agents out there trying to execute a mock search warrant or look for a fugitive to apprehend. That sort of thing. So there's some they try to make it as lifelike as possible. And it's, as I say, it's been tweaked a little bit over the years because now there's a bit more of an emphasis on cybercrime and other national security issues. Over the years, the Bureau has sort of gotten out of the street crime, bank robberies and fugitives, that kind of thing. They still have a hand in it, but it's changed with the times.
Oh, naturally, and especially now post 9/11, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, to focus a little bit too on counterterrorism. So, getting to the go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm good.
Getting to the New York field office in 75, I mean, anywhere is an eye-opener out of Quantico, especially as a rookie. You're excited to have made it through the academy and to begin your career. But if there's field offices to start, I mean, you have LA, right? You have Chicago, some of the field offices in Texas for the same reason. But New York, and it's been debated. I mean, DC likes to stake their claim to it, but people would say that New York is the flagship office of the bureau.
I would say that as well.
Oh, of course. No disrespect to my friend Tom O'Connor, who worked in the DC field office for a long time. He was a guest on this program a while ago. But nevertheless, getting there in 75, a much different New York, a New York that was dealing with domestic terrorism, a New York that was dealing with the mob having its hands on pretty much everything, which we'll discuss. Tell me about just getting there and learning the ropes early on from senior agents.
Well, the policy then, as it is now, is that a new agent coming into the office works what we call applicant matters. In other words, there's a squad that just does background checks for potential new agents or presidential appointees and that kind of thing. And those agents are taken under the wing of a more experienced, more experienced agent. To basically learn the paperwork, how the office runs, and things like that. And then after a period of time, the agent can express an interest, not always granted, but express an interest in moving on to one of the fields that most interests them, whether it's a counterterrorism squad or a national security squad that handles espionage matters, counterintelligence, or cybercrime or organized crime or white collar crime, what have you. But basically, you're assigned wherever the need is most prevalent. And the New York office, we call it the flagship office for good reason. It's the only office of the 56 field offices where the the Bureau's national priorities are also priorities of the office. New York is the only office that has a major or at least at that time, a major organized crime problem. Given the presence of the UN as a major counterintelligence responsibility, major counterterrorism responsibility, given Wall Street, a major white collar crime responsibility, so just about none of the other field offices can claim that their priorities match those in New York.
And it's not to say that they're any less busy, but what you mentioned, I mean, New York, they don't call New York the crossroads of the world for nothing. All those things factor significantly into the investigations that take place to not just threats coming into the city of any form, but as people have pointed out in the program previously, threats emanating from the city going elsewhere.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's 8 million people in the city itself, and I don't know what the population is in the greater metropolitan area. But there are various ethnic groups, and those folks in far off places that want to do us harm can insinuate themselves into the various neighborhoods here in the New York area, and plan things to happen elsewhere in the country. So we run the gamut of threats.
Absolutely. So after that initial assignment as a newer agent that you just alluded to, what was your primary beat for a little bit?
Well, I was assigned to a kidnapping and extortion squad on our criminal division, and that squad had, just before I got to New York, that squad had investigated the kidnapping of Bronfman, the Edgar Bronfman's son. Bronfman of the whiskey company fame. There was a major kidnapping involving his son. But after I got there, probably the most prominent kidnapping that I was involved with was the daughter of Calvin Klein, Marcy Klein.
Oh, wow.
That was in 1978. Turns out, make a long story short, her babysitter, I think she was only 8 or 9 years old at the time, but her babysitter basically kidnapped her and made a ransom demand. She wanted $100,000, and there was a whole big surveillance throughout Manhattan. We knew that the drop, so to speak, the ransom was going to be dropped by Calvin Klein at Grand Central Station, in a certain area in Grand Central Station. So obviously we had it staked out, and lo and behold, after a few hours, a friend of the babysitter came and picked up the package and we obviously surveilled that person back to the location where the Marcy was recovered. There were 3 arrests and convictions in that case, but that whole period in the mid to late 70s, the violent crime, the bank robberies especially, were going through the roof in New York. And we had 2 bank robbery squads actually in the office that worked along with the New York Police Department's major case squad. And it was only in like 1979 that the head of the New York FBI office and the police commissioner at the time, Bob McGuire, decided that we got to work together on these things. So the FBI NYPD Joint Bank Robbery Task Force was formed, and bank robberies came down. That unit investigated only armed bank robberies, the so-called note jobs, where somebody goes into a bank and just hands the teller a note saying, I've got a gun, but doesn't display it. Those were handled strictly by the major case squad of the NYPD. But the task force turned out to be very, very successful, and that in turn then led to the creation of the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
Because oftentimes, I mean, listen, with robberies and terrorism alike, one of the connecting factors, as we'll discuss tonight, is money. So that's sensical when you explain it. I didn't know that was the origins. So that's fascinating too here, because especially with some of, and we'll get into it now, with some of the domestic terrorism going on back then, the need for a joint terrorism task force, people think of it in a different context now, post 9/11, but in the 70s, there was a need with how many groups were running around.
That's right. As a matter of fact, we'll get into the task force later, but pre-terrorism task force, I was on the squad that investigated some of the domestic groups here, and all the way from the FALN, which was the Puerto Rican independence group that bombed the Francis Tavern, or claimed credit for the bombing of the Mobil Oil building in August of '77. Besides the FALN, there was the Jewish Defense League. There was an organization named Omega 7, which was an anti-Castro Cuban group that periodically would place bombs outside the Russian consulate to the UN, the Russian mission to the UN on 67th Street. That happened 3 or 4 times. And sometimes they set off bombs at the Cuban mission to the UN as well. There was also even a group called Otpor, O-T-P-O-R, which was a Croatian group that was seeking independence of Croatia from Yugoslavia. And they set off a bomb on St. Patrick's Day in 1980 outside the Yugo Bank on Fifth Avenue. So there were a variety of domestic groups, although they had interests really far, outside the United States, but they were committing their acts here in the United States. And so we were investigating those cases, but so was the NYPD's arson and explosion division. So what would happen is we would butt heads every once in a while. A bomb would go off, the FBI would show up, the NYPD would show up, we would interview the witnesses, the NYPD would interview the same witnesses. There'd be a fight over whose laboratory is going to analyze the evidence and all of that. And as I say, finally, based on the success of the bank robbery task force, cooler heads prevailed and said, what, we have to do this in the terrorism field. And so that was the genesis of the Joint Terrorism Task Force in May of 1980.
And it's interesting you mentioned the Cuban group, because I remember a story a good friend of mine told me, Danny McNally from the Bomb Squad, where that Cuban group had an office of their own, hidden, nondescript, within the confines of Midtown Manhattan. And one night, in one particular bombing incident, one guy pretends to be drunk, and he goes up to the booth, which was manned by an NYPD officer acting drunk. He falls down. The officer leaves the booth to check on him, and as he does, the bomb goes off. Doesn't injure the officer, takes the officer out of the line of fire. The guy gets up, gives a thumbs up, runs off. So type of stuff going on back then.
Well, it's funny, given the FBI's counterintelligence responsibilities, it's safe to say that the Bureau in New York was monitoring the Soviet, at that time, the Soviet mission to the UN pretty extensively. So I remember one particular night when one of those Omega-7 bombs went off. We all responded to the mission, and I always remember my boss saying to the head of security, the Russian security person, "We're going to want your videotapes from your security cameras." And he said, "Well, you'll get those videotapes when you give me your videotapes of our building," because he was assuming that we had coverage of the electronic coverage of their building, which may or may not be true.
Allegedly, could have happened, perhaps. But nevertheless, let's dive into the FALN for a moment, because as you mentioned, Mobil Oil Building in '77, Francis Tavern in 1975, which killed several, and that was during the peak of lunch hour at the time.
Right.
Their mission was independence for Puerto Rico, separate completely from the United States. And during this time, they were really neck and neck with the Black Panthers organization in terms of the terror that was being caused. The Black Panthers specialized in robberies and assassinations of police officers. The FALN specialized in bombs. So you definitely had your hands full during the '70s, early '80s.
Right. Well, the FALN was active in Chicago as well as New York.
Yeah.
And they would every once in a while they would do these big bomb events, but also they would go into Macy's, or at that time Gimbel's department store, and place little incendiary devices in the pockets of men's suits in the men's department or whatever, and it caused all kinds of havoc. The buildings would have to be evacuated and all that kind of thing. But yeah, their goal was to the independence of Puerto Rico from United States, as the United States territory. And in August of '77, you mentioned the Mobil Oil Building. That was there was one person murdered as a result of that bomb. And it turns out actually I was the case agent on that particular case. And it turned out that Marie Haiti Torres, who was the wife of Carlos Torres, the head of the FALN, Marie Haiti Torres is the one who went into the Mobil Oil Building that morning wearing a disguise. And she had sticks of dynamite taped to the shaft of an umbrella. And she hung it she went to the employment office there, and she hung it on a coat rack next to this poor guy who was applying for a job. She left, and the bomb goes off, and he obviously dies. But the way we identified her as the culprit was because she left a fingerprint on a piece of paper, an application, because she had asked the clerk there for an application, a job application, and then she gave it back to the clerk just before she left, and we found that one piece of paper, and it had that one fingerprint. Turns out that she had been arrested in Chicago sometime before that at some protest, and the Chicago PD had fingerprinted her. It was only because of that arrest in Chicago that we knew it was Marie Haiti Torres, and we knew that she was the wife of Carlos Torres, and one thing led to another. Eventually, she and her husband and a few others were arrested in Evanston, Illinois, a few years later. And Marie Haiti Torres is now doing a life sentence in a federal lockup out on the West Coast.
And one of the turning points, too, is as they were creating bombs one night, one of them went off, and one of the founders of FALN blew his hand off in the process. So that was the key to identifying him.
Yeah, Morales, who even injured as he was able to escape from Bellevue Hospital.
Yeah,
by climbing out a window.
Of all things.
Yeah, So if you're dedicated, I guess you can do almost anything.
Yeah. One of the things I did want to ask you about correlating to the FALN is March of '80, they do 2 raids, and this is how far they took it. And in today's scope of terrorism, you would never think about something like this, but this did happen back in March of '80. They raid the campaign headquarters of then President Carter and Vice President Mondale, and that occurred in Chicago. But then there was the raid of George H.W. Bush's headquarters in New York City. Any hand in that investigation?
I do remember, I wasn't the case agent, but I do remember responding to the campaign office, which I think was on 59th Street, very close to Park Avenue. And I remember that we were doing the crime scene investigation. But other than that, I have to tell you, my memory is little bit weak on that. We are talking a number of years ago, but
Right.
yes, I was involved in it, but not in any supervisory way.
No, that's fine. Joe Valiquette's our guest here on the Mike DeNaven podcast, retired supervisory special agent of the FBI, also the FBI spokesman from 1981 until 2005, volume 18 of the Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. Now, it's interesting segueing into you becoming the spokesman. So, and this is something you volunteer for. It's not a bad gig, but you're one of the originals as part of Joint Terrorism Task Force when it was founded in 80, one of the 12 agents assigned to it. You mentioned the good partnership that was formed early on with the New York City Police Department. That's a good gig to have. It's a gig that if one wants to stay there for the remainder of their career, the majority of their career, they could. But this opportunity opened up in 81. You volunteered for it. You got it. So take me through your thought process to go from JTTF to being a spokesman.
Well, I was always interested in the media and news, and I remember watching Walter Cronkite in Huntley Brinkley when the broadcasts were only 15 minutes long. Back in the late 50s and early 60s. I think they went to a half hour in 1962 or 3. So I always had that interest in the back of my mind that, someday if I could get in that line, that would be good. There was a vacancy in the New York office. Of course, New York being the media capital of the world, we did have a media coordinator in the New York office. The problem was that there was a vacancy because my predecessor had a bit of got swept up in a leak investigation on Abscam.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, there was this vacancy. And in the Bureau, there is this tendency to think of dealing with the media as a ticket to nowhere. You can only get into trouble.
Right.
And so if you wanted to ask me how many people volunteered for the media job in New York, I would have to tell you there was just one volunteer, and that was me. So it was not a highly sought after position, but I expressed my interest, and by process of elimination, I got it. And then wound up doing that for 24 years. Most of that by myself, but then about 13 years later, in the mid 90s, I was joined by Jim Margolin, who I don't know if you know that name, but after he retired from the Bureau, he became the spokesman for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. He has since retired from that job as well. We're all getting older. But anyway, so that's how I wound up in the media position, was that nobody else wanted it, number one, and I had an interest in doing it, and so I did that for 24 years until I retired in 05.
So that I go back to something John Miller mentioned on this program a few years ago when he was the guest for my 100th episode, where he said, and he wore both hats as a reporter and as somebody on the side of law enforcement as well, mainly with the NYPD, where you should never, and I'm paraphrasing, expect law enforcement to ask the press to be an arm for them to get the message out, or vice versa. But at the same time, there has to be that working relationship. Naturally, the press wants to be clued in on what's going on because they have to relay that message to the general public, whether it be local or national. And in this instance, locally, in a hotbed like New York City, where you have legacy media like CBS, NBC, as well as ABC and Fox, it's critical to know, to not only give an insight into cases, but also, listen, on a more lighter level, the good work the Bureau is doing that deserves to be recognized.
Oh, absolutely. That's one message that I tried to convey to the supervisors of the various squads in the office and all that, that the media can sometimes be viewed as the investigator's enemy, but also they can be helpful in a lot of ways. And one of those ways is getting the Bureau's message out. Whether you're looking for a fugitive, obviously we want publicity for the fugitive, seeking leads on a particular matter, a bombing or what have you. But I know that over the years, every time I would walk into an FBI supervisor's office, they would kind of look askance at me, like, oh my God, if I'm going to tell Joe this, is he going to leak this to to the media or whatever, which I would not do that. But yeah, no, it's the one thing I always stood by, and the Bureau always kind of instilled this in their media coordinators around the country, is that you don't lie. You don't lie to the media. If you can't say anything, then don't say anything.
Right.
It's but once you are caught in a lie, then your credibility is shot, and they're not going to believe you again. But yes, we want positive publicity for the Bureau, because when those FBI agents go conduct their leads and go and see the super of a building and pull out their credentials and say, I'm with the FBI, we want them to have a positive view of the FBI and cooperate. We don't want them to be fearful that they're only going to get into trouble if they talk to an FBI agent.
I think part of it too also goes back to when cases are hot and heavy, and we'll talk about some of the more notable ones in a little bit. But nevertheless, like I said earlier, the press wants to know. The press is an extension of the public, therefore the public wants to know.
Right.
But there's a balancing act where, and I'm glad you just mentioned not leaking anything, where you do want to keep the press informed to a reasonable degree, but not at the risk of compromising the case that the agents are building. And as somebody that wore both hats and was on the other side of that as an agent that had to build cases at times, that's a delicate line to walk. So what was the key for you to successfully walk it?
Well, I guess it was just, it was tough. It's your reputation, right? I mean, you basically are only as good as your reputation is. And it certainly was never, if a reporter called me when I was at the Bureau, if a reporter called me with information that was wrong and about a particular investigation that we were conducting, I would, in a subtle way, try to steer that person away from that, because we don't want misinformation out there either, because that can only complicate what the Bureau is doing. I did feel when I made the jump, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but when I made the jump over to WNBC and sort of on the other side of the fence, I did feel that sometimes we in the media now were in a race with those on the other side of the fence at the Bureau or the NYPD or whoever it was, to get the answers, to find that witness, to get that videotape from the from the surveillance camera, or from the bodega down the street, or whatever. And I always had mixed feelings about that, and which is one of the reasons why I'm still not doing that, because obviously we want the cases to be solved and all that, and we don't want premature. We don't want witness statements to be in the media before the Bureau or the NYPD can talk to these witnesses and all that. It's a fine line, and it's kind of like you have to feel your way as you go.
Right. And I harken back to something that happened in Los Angeles at the time, when the police back then, or at least the mayor at the time, was a little bit too candid about the Night Stalker and the leads the police were building on the Night Stalker. And that allowed him to hear that, essentially be able to act around that and continue killing. It threw the investigation off, it threw it into haywire. That's perhaps the most egregious example of the 20th century. And, again, it's still talked about in the 21st century. So I mentioned hot and heavy, and we'll start with the mob in terms of notable cases while you were the spokesman. So before you became spokesman, they were quite active in the 70s. You had the assassination of Carmine Galante in 79, which kickstarted an internal power struggle to murder the three capos in 81. Then you get the murder of Castellano and Bellotti outside Spark Steakhouse, of which the 40th anniversary is coming up in December of 85. Right. So that plays into the prosecution of the five families. Gotti becomes boss. Unfortunately for the mafia, he's not as low-key as his predecessors had been. A lot of indictments came down, especially with the commission trial. Being the spokesman during that time, as you're seeing quite literally, a power struggle for New York end, with law enforcement winning, and the grip the mafia had on New York being significantly weakened. What was that like?
Well, that was an exciting time. You used the correct term when you said the mafia is now weakened. We would never want to say that the mafia is dead, because it's not dead.
No.
But certainly back in the 70s, during my time in the Bureau, in the 70s and in the 80s, the mafia reigned supreme. And it was only in the early 80s that that prosecutors in the U.S. attorney's offices, both in the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of New York, as well as the FBI investigators, started to use the RICO statute. Now, the RICO statute had been on the books since like 1967 or whatever, around that time, and but nobody understood how to use it or what. And finally, I don't know exactly who should get the credit, but it was decided that, you know what, we're going to have to attack these people as a racketeering enterprise, and which carries much greater penalties. Life, a lot of these mob bosses, the mob bosses that got convicted in that commission case, were all sentenced to life terms.
Yep.
Even, I mean, a lot, they were old to begin with, but they were put away, for life after that. But the racketeering, the RICO statute, allowed other crimes, predicate crimes, as they say, to be brought into the conspiracy and made it easier to attack this monolith that was the mob. Now, with all the convictions over the years, including subsequently Gotti and Sammy Gravano helped out on that, as you know.
It
The mob has definitely been weakened, but it's still a factor. It's still there. The New York FBI office has reduced the number of agents working organized crime. I don't know exactly what the numbers are. That's probably classified anyway. But there is still one or two squads that are devoted to the traditional organized crime. But simultaneous with that, though, there was yet another task force that was formed in the 80s to address the problems of Asian and Eastern European organized crime elements, whether it be the Russian, I forget exactly the name of the Russian organized crime group, but they were very active out in Brighton Beach and the Brooklyn area and all that, and some of the Asian gangs were into drugs and things here in the area. So the FBI and the NYPD were addressing all of that, as well as simultaneously addressing the traditional mob. As I say, the traditional mob is not what it was. It's still there, and it'll probably never be totally eradicated. As long as people are looking to make a quick buck and don't mind a little violence, they're going to be there.
Yes, I believe the term for Russian mafia is bratva, if I'm not mistaken.
I thought there was another one, but I'm older than you, so my memory is probably not as good as yours.
No, but nevertheless, to your point, I mean, especially now with social media being what it is, different apps existing for different things. Mainly, the FBI's heavily involved in the mafia rather is heavily involved in gambling. When you have these betting apps as well, they can kind of rig that. So they're always going to have a hand, but it's not as compelling as it was back in the day when, again, quite like I mentioned earlier, they had their hands in literally everything you can think of: construction, movies, you name it, they had a hand in it.
Right.
And, segueing that into Gotti had not only run amok, but in the process, he had made a mockery of the justice system. He didn't earn the nickname Teflon Don for nothing. But it was his own carelessness that got him brought down ultimately. Besides Gravano, I think even if Sammy hadn't flipped, eventually with how reckless and flamboyant John was, much to the chagrin of his fellow mobsters who were a little bit more old school, he would have brought himself down anyway. So finally being able to nail him, he was popular in his neighborhood, but there's a lot of bodies behind that and a lot of bloodshed behind that. What was that like? And did it intrigue you at all to see how anti his conviction and arrest, his neighborhood and the Italian community, for at least for the most part in New York City, how opposed they were to that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, Gotti had, as you say, had been able to skate on a number of state jury trials. Jury tampering was one of his fortes, or those around him, and we, the FBI, had been surveilling him outside his social club in Little Italy for forever, And finally, there was information developed that when he had to have secret meetings where decisions were going to be made as to who was going to get hit and that kind of thing, he would go to an apartment upstairs in that social club. I think it was on Mulberry Street. And it was there was an older woman who had that apartment, and basically he would tell her to leave, and he would have his secret meetings with his henchmen up there. We, the FBI, were able to plant electronic surveillance devices in that apartment, and that's where some of those tapes came that were used at his subsequent federal trial. I was at the office the night that he and Gravano were arrested in 1990, I think it was, in December, I know. And he was a gentleman, as you would expect. I mean, when he was being processed, photographed, fingerprinted, everything from his mouth was yes sir, no sir, and all that kind of thing. But yes, the reaction from his neighborhood to the charges being brought against him were very surprising. He was actually larger than life, and you know, and in a way, I mean, that was very disappointing to see that somebody like him could be held up as a hero in some quarters of New York.
You know, it's kind of similar to Pablo Escobar to a degree, different types of organized crime, but ultimately the same perception publicly. Or if you went to Pablo's neighborhood in Colombia, he was regarded as a hero. He would supply them with food. He would supply them with the basic necessities and take care of them to essentially have them eating out of the palm of his hand. It was kind of a twisted case of Stockholm syndrome. Not that God, he so much preyed on the community. He normally preyed on other criminals. But the common thing that I've heard with people who lived in the neighborhood during that time is, oh, the neighborhood was so safe. Everything was so prim and pristine. Nobody messed with the neighborhood when he was there.
Right. And I think, I guess it was 4th of July. He used to put on a big fireworks show and all that kind of thing for the neighborhood and all that. And they appreciated that. I'm sure it was spectacular.
Oh, at least for the time being. My favorite clip is after he was arrested. A reporter, I forget who, but she asked how one gentleman felt about the arrest. He's like, he was the best guy around. And she asked, what about all the people he murdered? What murder? So that's just a glimpse into how they felt about him at the time. Of course, he went to jail for life in 1992, died in 2002 of cancer at the age of 62.
And of course, one of the big accomplishments there in factors in getting him convicted was the cooperation of his underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano. And of course, Sammy has gone on to other things following his that whole incident where he's gotten into trouble subsequently even after he was in the witness protection program.
Yeah, got kicked out.
And
for of all things drug trafficking in Arizona. Now he has a podcast of his own. So yeah, that man has led a rather interesting life, to put it mildly.
Right.
Talking with Joe Valiquette here in the Mike the New Haven podcast, volume 18 of the Beat Profiles of Police nationwide. Stu, I do see your question. I'll try to get to it a little bit later if I can. I don't want you to think I'm ignoring it. So terrorism had existed domestically, and we're starting to see it kind of sprout up in terms of foreign adversaries bringing it to United States shores. I go back to Myra Kahani's assassination in 1990 as a hallmark moment, because a lot of the players involved with that would be involved with the World Trade Center bombing of February 26th of 1993. El Sayed Nosair was the shooter. He was one of the guys involved, of course, in that plot. One of the guys that helped organize his defense fund was Osama bin Laden. When that, and I'll let you kind of take it from here. It's a cold day. It's kind of snowy. And then just after noon, all hell breaks loose when that truck bomb goes off. Take me through your day.
Well, my day actually started at Newark Airport because I was about to leave to go on a golf vacation at Myrtle Beach. Obviously, I didn't go. That was astounding. I mean, to think that somebody would drive a truck into the basement of the World Trade Center and load it. I guess it was I think it was a U-Haul truck, It was a rental truck anyway.
It was a Ryder truck.
A Ryder truck, right? I'm sorry. And basically their goal was to bring down the building.
Yep.
That's why they went down into the basement and thought that that's what they could achieve. But that's when we really started to see foreign groups, foreign terrorists come to the United States and do their dirty work here. It's funny, over the years, we had these domestic groups, FALN and all those, and then it kind of morphed into this international groups coming here doing things, eventually with the 9/11 and what have you. And now I know I'm getting ahead of us, but now we're sort of seeing the domestic groups, white nationalists and things like that. It's sort of becoming a domestic terrorism threat is rising to the top again. So it kind of goes in cycles. But that day, the media attention on the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993, of course, was huge. And I remember even Ted Koppel came up. He was doing Nightline at the time, and on ABC. And he wanted access to the. This was a couple of days after the bomb went off. He wanted access to the site, and we did. It was all secured at that point. We had recovered the evidence that we thought would help. So we allowed him to go down there, and he did one or two shows, I think, from down there. But of course, in that crime scene, one of the pieces of evidence that was recovered was the VIN number.
Yes.
From that Ryder rental truck, which was traced then back to a rental agency here in New Jersey. It was rented here in New Jersey. I want to say Jersey City, but I'm not sure if it was Jersey City. But anyway, so we contacted the investigators, contacted the rental agency, and found out that the person who rented the Ryder rental truck was going to come back to get their deposit. Stupidly enough.
Yeah.
So obviously we set up a surveillance at the Ryder rental facility, and when he showed up, he was arrested, and one thing led to another. But we didn't realize. I guess we didn't realize at the time just how this was the beginning of what was to come. Certainly in our neck of the woods here in the New York area, in terms of international terrorism.
Well, I mean, of course, you had Mohammed Salameh coming back to get the deposit specifically. And it was the work of, and I've chronicled it on the program, NYPD bomb squad detective Don Sadawi, an alumni of this program, who did some great work with that case at the time to discover that VIN number, with Joe Hanlon, I believe, as well, who was an ATF agent. The FBI was involved in that investigation quite heavily, obviously, as well. And it's very much, it kickstarts a period of time even before 9/11. I'll just stop it short where the USS Cole was bombed in October of 2000, where you're really starting to see just how elaborate this network is. And a quick note before I proceed with that, by the way, this was also kind of, at least for the rest of the nation, Ray Kelly's coming out party. New York City knew who he was, but he really became one of the leading voices at that time as well, in his first stint as NYPD commissioner. But I'll never forget something he said a couple years ago when they were doing an interview with him about the 20th anniversary of 9/11, where he mentioned, he thought it was a one-off. A lot of people did. In hindsight, listen, hindsight's 20/20. Obviously, it wasn't. But was that the feeling in the Bureau at the time, that once they were arrested, considering, it seemed, with the exception of Youssef, this was the gang that couldn't shoot straight, that it was a one-off? Was that the sentiment?
Yes, I think so. And as you say, it wasn't too long after that, whether it was the bombing of the Cole or the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania.
Yep.
Where members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, both detectives and agents, deployed to Africa and to Yemen in the instance of the Cole investigation. The task force actually became a worldwide arm of U.S. law enforcement, and it was recognized as the premier investigative agency. Based on, unfortunately, they were gaining a lot of experience because of all these incidents and everything. So they were kind of the go-to, the fly team when there was a U.S. entity that was attacked by a terrorist organization abroad. The tentacles of the task force really expanded. When it was first formed in 1980, there were only 24 of us. There were 12 agents and 12 NYPD detectives. The detectives were from the Arson and Explosion Division. Now it's somewhere around 400 or so, just in New York City. It's somewhere around 350 to 400, primarily FBI and NYPD, but also ATF and DEA is in there, and U.S. Customs, ICE, New York State Police, everybody and their brother is part of that task force, and that became the model for the other 120 or so joint terrorism task forces that were subsequently formed in other parts of the country.
Bill Ryan, who was a detective assigned to arson explosion at the time, says not everyone thought it was a one-off. I certainly did not. And yes, that is true. A lot of people did think, mainly John O'Neill, who we'll talk about in a little bit as well, that it was not a one-off, that they would return, and in return they did. And I do want to get to TWA Flight 800, and I will momentarily, but gradually what you saw in the 90s when it came to terrorism was it was becoming more personal. Because think about it, 1993, that same year, the helicopters of the U.S. military in Somalia are shot down. 1995, a bomb explodes in Riyadh near a U.S. Air Force base. Khobar Towers is bombed, killing 20 U.S. soldiers in 1996. We also, of course, get, as you mentioned, the bombing of Kenya and Tanzania and those embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 98. The year before that, 2 Hamas guys tried to blow up the subway in 1997 on Atlantic Avenue. So it's getting more and more obvious just how violent this threat is and how troubling and determined these individuals are, to say the least. So before I move to TWA, I'll ask you, when bin Laden sat down with John Miller for Nightline in 1998, when you saw that interview, I imagine the hair on your neck had to stand up.
Oh, absolutely. John, I've known John for 40 years, 35, 40 years. And first off, I'm not surprised that he was able to get access to Osama bin Laden.
Neither am I.
Yeah, given his talents and all that. But yeah, I mean, the message that was that came out of that whole interview was definitely chilling, and anybody who had any doubts as to what the future held, they were allayed at that point. I mean, everybody, bin Laden was the target of all of our investigative efforts from then on.
And we'll talk about how that came to a head in 2001. But smack dab in the middle of this, and the concerns initially went to terrorism, was later proven not to be, but there were still a lot of questions about it. July 17th, 1996, TWA Flight 800 explodes over Long Island shortly after takeoff. More riches, to be exact, goes into the water. Everybody on board perished. We're not far removed from Youssef's arrest, and it's not just for the bombing of the Trade Center that he's being arrested for. He would eerily say, if I had a little bit more money, when they took off the cape over his head, and he looks at the Trade Center, if I had a little bit more money and time, I would have brought them both down.
Right.
In line with that, he'd also been arrested for Bojinga, which, for those not familiar with that plot, he wanted to blow up airliners across the world. He had 12 planes in mind that he was trying to bring down through bombs. Naturally, hearing this, and not too far removed from the bombing, we get TWA Flight 800 going down in the summer of 96, so when that first happened, just take me through the night itself. And when you first heard about this, did your initial mindset go to terrorism?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I remember we all gathered in the command post. The New York FBI office has a permanent command post used for major arrest situations or other incidents that happen, and everybody immediately responded to that. And the FBI had offices, satellite offices, out at JFK Airport as well as further out on Long Island, and those agents all responded, as well as the Nassau County, Suffolk County, and the New York State Police. But yes, the everybody thought at first that this is definitely terrorism, and I remember Jim Kallstrom was the assistant director in charge of the FBI office in New York at the time, another larger than life figure.
Yes, I would have loved to have had him on the show.
Yeah, the late Jim Kellstrom.
Yeah.
I mean, he took the bull by the horns, and I remember that, I guess it was the next day, he and I went out to Senator Morich's, to the Coast Guard station out there, where the search and recovery effort was being coordinated with the Coast Guard and what have you. Mayhem. I mean, it was just, there was a gargantuan effort to try to get assets together from the Navy, the U.S. Navy, the Coast Guard, and law enforcement to recover victims, number one.
Yeah.
And then to send divers down to try to recover as much of the fuselage and the plane as possible. And then, of course, the issue came up, well, what are we going to do with all this material that we recover? And wound up identifying a hangar at Grumman. Grumman gave us the use of one of their hangars where the reconstruction happened. And a good part of that plane was reconstructed. I don't know if you remember seeing photos of that.
Yeah, it was in the hangar for about 25 years until, the 25th anniversary.
Yeah, I walked inside the reconstruction. I mean, it was very, very eerie.
Yes.
But anyway, it was through the United States Navy that had the side scanning sonar and these really professional divers that we were able to recover the victims as well as the debris. But of course, everybody was supposing that this was either a bomb on the plane or a malfunction on the plane. And then, of course, there was also the theory out there that the United States had accidentally shot down the plane.
Yes.
Because there were one or two Navy ship cruisers that were off the coast of Long Island doing some kind of training exercises or whatever, and they were equipped with missiles and what have rockets that theoretically could have been launched. That theory took on a life of its own, and the people who were proponents of that theory would not listen to reason. We had gone to send agents and other investigators out to those ships. We interviewed every crew member, took an inventory of their weaponry. Nothing was missing, and to think that with all the sailors that would have been involved in this and would have witnessed it, that some one of them wouldn't have whispered to a girlfriend or a wife or whatever that, hey, our ship was responsible. I mean, it's unbelievable. So we never really gave that much credence, although Pierre Salinger and a few others did. Pierre Salinger, being the journalist, but also the press secretary for President Kennedy years ago. But working with the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, we were able to bring the debris in, and the metallurgist went over everything that was recovered, the scientists, the chemists, and whatever. And finally, as you know, I'm sure, that it was determined that there was a short in a wire. There are miles and miles of wiring in the 747. There was a short in one of the wires that went through the main, the central fuel tank of the plane. If you recall, this was July. It was a hot night.
It was, yes, July 17th.
The plane was late taking off, so everybody was on board. It was sitting on the tarmac, engines running, air conditioning going, and that center fuel tank was not totally full because they felt they didn't need all the tanks to be filled to fly to Paris. So it was determined that this broken wire that went through the center fuel tank created some sort of a spark, which ignited the fumes that were in the center fuel tank, and that's what caused the explosion. Since then, I guess the the wiring does not go through fuel tanks, and I think the fuel tanks are always totally filled now. They don't want vacancy, in the space in these fuel tanks where fumes can accumulate. So that's what came out of that. But that was always, not everybody believes that theory, but I think most people kind of accept that was the cause.
Yeah, I've had a few friends of mine from the bomb squad on this program to kind of dissect that case who were involved in the investigation. I've had differing perspectives. I understand where each one's coming from. And at the time, if I remember correctly, the black box was obtained, but it was, when you heard the audio, it wasn't as definitive or conclusive to identify, oh yeah, this is where things went wrong. That's why that happened. Right,
you're right. I had forgotten about that. But yes, the black box was recovered, or the two black boxes, and they didn't really help a whole lot.
Yeah. One thing I didn't want to gloss over either before I get to, unfortunately, 9/11. A few months after this, again, continuing the theme of terrorism and its nexus to America, particularly New York City, I don't know if the Bureau ever figured out who sent them, but January 1997, letter bombs the United Nations, targeting Al Hayat, which was a controversial Arabic language newspaper, notable in that it would publish perspectives from all sides of the political spectrum, which in the Middle East, as we know, is especially volatile. 4 bombs in specific to different offices, one in Washington, D.C., about a few of them in New York City. The NYPD bomb squad was able to successfully defuse the ones in New York, one of which I forget where it was sent to, went off, injuring a couple of workers. Any involvement, as a spokesman at the time, with that, and did the Bureau ever really identify who had sent those bombs in the first place?
I'm going to have to plead ignorance, in the sense that I don't really recall. That was a long time ago. I really don't recall that.
Oh, no worries. It was covered before on this program as part of the Tales from the Boom Room series that occurred on Monday, January 13th of 1997. 4 bombs in total sent to the
I remember the incident, but I don't remember the aftermath and whether anybody was ever held responsible.
No problem. So that segues into, again, just to set the stage. John O'Neill was a maverick. John O'Neill had a style that some loved, others didn't. He had been one of the early voices. He wasn't the only one, but he was one of the earliest voices to point out the threat of bin Laden. He was working in the New York field office during that time, having different meetings with the likes of NYPD Commissioner Howard Safer, NYPD Chief of Department Lou Anamone, and different figures to alert them to this threat. John had been a part of the investigation into the Colón bombing in 2000, which was difficult because I'll never forget what somebody said in that episode of Nightline featuring bin Laden in 98, where they described the FBI, at least in the Middle East, as a forensic bull in a Arab China shop. It was always going to be a volatile relationship, which came to a head in, of course, 2001 with September 11th, 2001.
Right.
I'll just let you take me through, and the audience by extension, that day. Where were you when at 8:46 everything for the Bureau, everything for the world changed?
Well, let me just, before I do that, let me just say about John O'Neill. I got to know him very well in New York, and he was the special agent in charge of the FBI's counterterrorism division in New York. And he himself had gone to Yemen on the Colón investigation, and he was recognized as a terrorism expert. And I always remember during that summer of 2001, I always remember him saying to folks in the office that something's happening, something's going to happen, something's coming. Unfortunately, he turned out to be prophetic. John retired from the Bureau at the end of August, and he's hired by Larry Silverstein to become the head of security at the World Trade Center. Talk about irony.
Yeah.
And John is seen on the day of 9/11. The videotape that was taken by the 2 French videographers.
All Day Brothers.
Who were doing the documentary. On the videotape that they took in the lobby of one of which tower I forget, but you can see John. You can see John on the phone making calls, probably calling FBI headquarters to see what they knew and all that kind of thing. And of course, John became one of the victims of the collapse of one of the towers. But on that day, as everybody knows, it was a bright, beautiful day. Everybody thought it was a Tuesday. I'm pretty sure it was a Tuesday. And we sitting in the office. Our office was about 4 blocks away from the World Trade Center. The federal building was, and I remember hearing a buzzing noise come over the top of the building, which was strange. I figured it was a helicopter or whatever. And then you hear a bang, and I heard one of the secretaries yell that a plane had just flown into the one of the towers. It would have been the North Tower, and so like everybody else, we figured at first this was an accident. So there was some malfunction in the plane or whatever, and so our office immediately responded to the area down there, and I remember. I guess it was maybe a half hour later. I was looking out the window from our conference room. I was looking at the smoke coming out of the tower of that first plane, when all of a sudden that big burst of flame, ball of flame, comes out of the south tower, because that second plane, which I couldn't see because it was south of of where I was, but that second plane had approached from the south and went into the south tower, and I just happened to be watching the 2 towers when that burst comes out, and then of course we knew this is deliberate. Everybody and their brother responded to the scene. We actually evacuated everyone, all the other agencies that were in the 26 Federal Plaza, because we didn't know whether the World Trade Center was the only target. Were there going to be other targets in Lower Manhattan? Because there had been significant terrorist prosecutions of Ramzi Youssef and others right across the street in the federal courthouse, and so we didn't know. We didn't know what we didn't know. So to make a long story short, we had to relocate the entire office to our parking garage, which was up on the West Side Highway, 25th Street, I think it was. And we had to dump all the cars out of the garage and basically set up a huge command post in our parking garage. NYPD was there, everybody was there. I remember the assistant director in charge at the time, Barry Mon, was in building number 7 with Rudy Giuliani and Bernie Kerik when that building was eventually collapsed. Because if you remember, the city had recently built their own command post. I think it was the Office of Emergency Management
in 7 World Trade Center.
Yeah, and they were in the bottom of that building. And when that building came down, it was only by luck that they were able to make their way out. But anyway, we couldn't go back to our office because there was all kinds of soot coming in through the ventilation system, and obviously the whole phone system in Lower Manhattan was dead. So we worked out of our garage, but we lost 2 FBI people that day. One was John O'Neill, and the other was Lenny Hatton. Yep. Lenny Hatton had been an agent, longtime agent, on our bank robbery task force. But he was also a volunteer firefighter in his hometown in Jersey. And as he was driving to the office that morning, he was on the Jersey side of the Hudson River and saw the flames and all that. He immediately went to the World Trade Center site, and he eventually became a victim of the collapse of one of the towers as well. But unforgettable period of time. Mayor Giuliani deserves a lot of credit for calming the city, or as much as as much as humanly possible. And it was a gargantuan effort to recover the debris and whatever, and eventually get it out to a landfill in Staten Island. I mean, this was an amazing effort. And of course, simultaneously with all this, we get reports that a plane has hit the Pentagon. So nobody really knew how far flung this whole incident was going to be. But it's certainly a day that nobody's ever going to forget. And it's something we should remember. I know I'm always going to remember looking at that building when that second plane went in.
And then thank you for sharing your perspective on that. And a couple notes on that, to your point about not knowing at the time that the Trade Center was the only target. It's worth noting that bin Laden, granted in absentia, in absentia at the time, had been indicted in that very courtroom.
Yeah,
nearby 26 federal process for his role in financing numerous terrorist attacks, including most recently the 98 bombing of the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. So there was a significance for sure and a correlation to where nobody knew in that moment.
Right. It was a legitimate concern that they were going to target that courthouse.
Yeah. And with Lenny, it's worth noting, you mentioned John appearing in the footage. Lenny appears in the footage too, from the Naudet brothers.
That's right.
He's visible. He's wearing a white shirt and I believe khaki pants. And given he kind of fell back on his firefighting role, he was helping. He was last seen in the South Tower, I believe, according to what I've read, helping firemen evacuate the victims. He was returning radio traffic back. There's audio of this on YouTube to agents who knew where he was. And then after the South Tower, they did not hear from him any longer. So he died as he lived. He died heroically. Right.
And let me say, too, about John O'Neill. John, in his own way, was a larger-than-life figure.
Yes, he was. King of Elaine's.
Exactly. And but John could be at Elaine's till late at night, but he was always in the office the next morning by 8 o'clock, shoes shined, pants pressed, and he knew everything that was going on in his division. I mean, I don't know when he ever slept.
No.
But he was. It really is a tragedy what happened to him.
And he was last seen in the South Tower helping as well. He was an FBI agent to the very end, and he died as he lived, helping others. And a documentary, for those of you, if you haven't seen it in the audience, that I highly recommend about John and what he knew is, well, The Man Who Knew, which PBS produced and aired in October of 2002. John, if you wrote a movie about the guy, and they did actually put together a TV show about him, The Looming Tower, which is also a must-watch on Hulu. But if you wrote a movie on the guy, it'd be hard-pressed to find a guy to play him. He led quite the life.
Right. He was a very controversial figure within the Bureau. For a variety of reasons, yeah.
So I'll ask you, after a tragedy like this, which is personal for a variety of reasons, namely chief among them because of not only the proximity to the Trade Center, I'm sure just beyond obviously losing John and Lenny, even if you didn't know Lenny that well, it's still one of yours who was killed in line of duty in this attack. I'm sure you had several friends in the fire department, in the police department, or maybe even civilians who worked in those towers who perished that day. Trying to be the spokesman in the aftermath of something like this, when people want to know, people are out for blood, particularly bin Laden's, and you're grieving your own losses. How did you manage that? What helped you keep it together during late 2001, early 2002?
I don't know. We were really behind the eight ball because the era of cell phones and all was like just at the beginning, and as I say, our phone systems were down for a long time, and it was really tough to communicate. The only way we really had to communicate, I couldn't take phone calls from the media. As a matter of fact, you mentioned Lenny Levitt at the beginning of our talk today. Lenny Levitt wrote in a column one time, "Where is Joe Valiquette?"
Yeah.
Because he couldn't get a hold of me.
Yeah.
He later explained in another column. But anyway, Mayor Giuliani and Commissioner Carrick and our boss, Barry Mon, as well as other folks from the city, held daily press conferences, and that was the only way to get the word out as to where the investigation stood, and what progress was being made, and to try to basically calm the city and allay fears that something else, the other shoe was about to drop. It's tough, especially when you can't communicate with anyone.
Right.
So basically, to answer your question, for the first couple of weeks and all, we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants, media-wise. And I really couldn't be that responsive.
And it's understandable in a situation like that. I'm looking for the column now. It was written in about late September of 2001. Spokesman found, it says here, September 24th. The FBI New York, it says here, Lenny's found, the FBI's New York office spokesman, Joe Valiquette, has surfaced. Unlike your humble servant who couldn't find him last week, 3 other Newsday reporters had no trouble locating him, Valiquette reports.
Yeah. Well, as I said at the beginning, Lenny, there was always an edge to Lenny, but he was fair. He did the right thing there.
Yeah. Of course. He definitely, he was a man of integrity for sure, amongst many other things. So, again, and to your point, just to wrap up our discussion on terrorism and counterterrorism and segue into your news reporting career. There was a time, and producer Victor knows this, he was living in New York City at the time, where there was legitimate concerns and warnings from that moment when the World Trade Center was attacked again in 2001 to about 2003 and 2004 by both New York City police officials and by the FBI, as well as other branches of federal law enforcement. Another terrorist attack is imminent. I mean, New Yorkers are still on edge, but in 2002, 2003, New Yorkers, in terms of being on edge, it was at a crescendo. And how could it not be?
Right, and the only thing you can do is try to communicate with through any means. We did a lot of newspaper interviews. It's funny, the Bureau, unlike the NYPD, the Bureau is not big on engaging with the media.
Yeah,
I'm speaking, more broadly than just the New York office, which
right.
I find ironic, given the fact that the Bureau's reputation was really created by a very media savvy person in the name of J. Edgar Hoover.
Yes.
For good or for ill, but he did get the Bureau's reputation out there with the G-men and the movies and the newsreels and all that back in the 30s and in the 40s. But but the Bureau does not have a very robust media presence, and part of that is because of the Department of Justice media guidelines, which are very, very restrictive. Basically, they say you can't say much of anything beyond what's in the public record by way of indictments or criminal complaints or what have you. It doesn't mean that you can't do interviews about general crime problems or terrorist threats that may be afoot. But we're always cognizant of the fact that we don't want to jeopardize an investigation and say something that we shouldn't. I still kind of think though that the Bureau is a little bit too slow to react sometimes, media-wise, to events.
That's a debate that can go on, for a long, long time, and I can see where you're coming from, and you had a perspective that few did. That brings us into 2005. Now, I go back to John because it's funny, when John left NBC for the NYPD in 1994, when Commissioner Bratton came in the first time, his colleagues kidded him that he was going over to the dark side. So you leave in 2005 and do the reverse. You go from law enforcement into media. Now, granted, your passion for it, as we discussed earlier, had always been there. But nevertheless, it had been a whirlwind last few years with 9/11 and its aftermath. It had been a hell of a career for you as well, nearly 30 years in the Bureau, 30 years in total from 75 to 05.
Right.
What was it that ultimately made you say, okay, you know what, it's time to close just this chapter of my life and open up a new one with WNBC?
Well, part of the one of the factors that went into the equation was that I was approaching retirement age. The Bureau has a mandatory 57-year retirement age. And at the time I was 55. And as long as you have 20 years in and are at least 50 years old, you can retire and collect a pension. So I was sort of approaching the end anyway. And because of the position that I held as media coordinator in the FBI, I became acquainted with Jonathan Dean to WNBC, the chief investigative reporter.
Yep.
And dealt with him a lot. And he knew I was sort of thinking about retiring. And he said, well, one day he called me and he said, we're going to put together an investigative team here of on-air people and producers. Would you consider coming over? And I thought about it and I said yes. And so following, I guess I retired in February of 2005, and in March I was then working out of 30 Rockefeller Plaza in the WNBC newsroom. and did that for 13 years, I guess. And I was helping mainly Jonathan Dienst, but also any of the other reporters and producers who had to interact with the FBI or other federal law enforcement entities on stories that they were working on. They would come to me and see if I could, grease the skids a little bit or give them some guidance.
At the time, I think Sarah Wallace, well, she's part of it now. Sarah Wallace, you crossed paths with as well, right?
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
definitely, yeah. She was a long time WABC, but then she came over to WNBC maybe 2 years before I left.
Fantastic reporter. I really enjoy Sarah Wallace's work. So, these are high-profile cases in which you're not only covering anything federal, but obviously local with the NYPD as well. So in terms of interaction, even if they know you and you obviously had a track record, you went way back both from the federal and the local side, you'd been an ally, you'd been a partner, there's still that, and we talked about it earlier, bureau to media, there's that trepidation. Media to bureau, there's also equal levels of trepidation, because even if you were involved in it in the past, the guard may come down slightly, but the guard's still there. What was key in helping to kind of ease the tension and allow for good communication?
Well, I always did feel a bit awkward, to be quite honest, in my role as producer at WNBC, when I had to call back to the FBI, for instance, because there were FBI agents spotted and wearing raid jackets on Queens Boulevard. What are they doing? That kind of thing. And I always did feel kind of awkward calling to see if I could get some sort of guidance or whatever. The thing I had going for me was that I had everybody at the bureau and in some of the other law enforcement agencies knew me, and they knew that that neither I nor Jonathan Dienst, for whom I was working primarily, were going to do anything that was going to jeopardize an investigation. Even the slightest bit of help when I would call the bureau and say, are we on the right track? If we were to report this, are we going to jeopardize anything? Are we on the right track? And if we could just get some little sense of, yeah, you're on the right track, without them spilling the beans, obviously. That was enormously helpful. But I think they only did that because of my time on their side of the fence, and the reputation that Jonathan has, and that I had. So it kind of worked out. But yeah, no, I'll admit I did feel awkward calling back there. It would have been great if they had spilled all the beans to me, but I didn't really think that they would, and they didn't.
And I can understand that too, to a degree, because again, once you leave, even if they respect you, and obviously you didn't leave on acrimonious terms, there is that, right. Well, you're on the other side now, so it's a little bit different. And wearing both hats, again, I'm sure it kind of came full circle for you. If there was some frustration on the media side over things that you wouldn't divulge because you couldn't, now I guess you can understand the reporter's pain on the other side of the coin.
Oh, absolutely. I must say, though, one of the things that I found very heartening, if that's a word, once I came over to NBC, especially when when Jonathan and I were contributing stories to the network or helping out the network, NBC News itself, on various, whether it was a terrorism story or whatever. What I found reassuring was the degree to which NBC always had the lawyers involved. When you write a script, and if it was really sticky, sensitive
subject matter,
the lawyers got involved because they wanted to make sure that we were being fair and that we weren't, defaming anyone or jeopardizing anything. And I found that to be reassuring. Actually, I didn't know when I was on the law enforcement side, I didn't know the degree to which the care goes into the stories, at least at the legacy medias. Now, obviously, we can't say that about every media outlet in the world. You have to kind of watch, have a sophisticated outlook as to. I always told people in the bureau that succeeded me in the media office, just know who you're talking to. If it's some reporter that's calling you that you've never dealt with before, or they're from, they're calling you from Las Vegas or someplace, somebody that you have no relationship, be careful. But if it's somebody that you have an ongoing relationship with, that you know is not going to do anything to jeopardize an investigation, because if they jeopardize an investigation, they're never going to get help again. It's in the reporter's interest not to jeopardize the investigation, because the Bureau will never help them again. But if somebody comes along and calls you that you have a relationship with, and you feel that you can kind of give a little guidance without going too far, do it. But again, you got to be careful. You have to know who you're talking to, and so anyway, coming over to NBC opened my eyes as to the care and that they put into all their stories. I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, they're a very well-run organization. There's a lot of reporters at NBC that I respect. I would love it if I can get some of them on this program, and hopefully we're working on that. So in the near future, hopefully that can be a reality.
I'll lobby on your behalf.
I appreciate that. And one of them would be Mr. Dean. So let's spend some time on him because, again, thorough with the capital T is Mr. Dean's his coverage and reporting. He's very well respected across the board. You go way back with him, as you mentioned earlier. What did you most enjoy about working with him, and what do you think is the best quality in him, not only as a reporter but as a person?
Well, as a reporter, I mean, he is dogged.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. At the end of the day, towards the end of the day, if I'd be getting ready to leave and then something happened, I knew we were here for the long haul all night. Because Jonathan is another one of those people that never sleeps. He's a bulldog when a story is when something happens. Very, very thorough. His cache of sources throughout the New York City metropolitan area, especially on the law enforcement side, is astounding. He has very good sources, and that's because they trust him, and it's his reputation. He's been around for, I guess, almost 30 years now, so working with him, it was great because we knew that we weren't going to put anything on the air willy-nilly that wasn't right. And plus, I mean, as a person, I mean, he's a great guy. He's always talking about his dogs and his kids. He's a very friendly guy. I'm not sure how well you might know him, but working with him was actually easy, except for when the story was breaking. Then all hell broke loose.
Well, one thing I'll ask you, and thank you for opening up on him. Like I said, he's someone I don't know him on a deeply personal level. We know one another professionally through LinkedIn primarily, but I would definitely love to have him on this program eventually. But I'll ask you, during those 13 years at NBC, a lot of major stories covered. What's one that stands out?
Oh, it's probably working on the Senator Robert Menendez.
Yes.
That went on forever.
That was a long time.
I was involved in the early stages when, in that case, I think he won it on appeal, as opposed to the most recent one, which I had nothing to do with. But I worked with Jonathan on the Menendez case. The Sheldon Silver, the New York State Assembly Speaker, was charged with extortion and what have you. Back, I forget exactly what year that was, but I worked with him on that. Bernie Kerik, when he got charged for lying to the authorities and tax fraud regarding renovations that were made to his apartment that he had in, I think it was in the Bronx or Upper Manhattan.
Yeah, in the Riverdale area.
Yeah, right. Basically, he got free renovations done by a construction company that had mob connections, and I remember chasing Bernie Kerik with a microphone up in the Bronx one time, trying to get a comment from him. I really felt odd doing that because not too many years prior to that, when he was commissioner. I remember sitting next to him at the FBI office when some big case was happening, and he was the commissioner, and I was in the FBI. And here now I'm chasing him down the street with a microphone. But we also had the pressure cooker bombers in Manhattan and over in Jersey. I forget what year it was.
2016.
2016, yeah.
Yep.
There were two pressure cookers. I think one of them went off and the other one was recovered down in the Chelsea section of Manhattan. And then there were several that were recovered over in New Jersey. I mean, those are the ones that stand out at the moment.
And again, they were all very noteworthy. So you end up leaving. And I'll ask you two questions to kind of put a bow on your time at NBC and your time on the Bureau. 30 years, we'll start with the Bureau. 30 years in the Bureau, across that time from 1975 to 2005. What changed? What stayed the same?
What changed? Well, the technology changed, certainly, but not. The Bureau does not have the technology that you see on TV these days. The three FBI shows that are on CBS at least they were on Tuesday nights last TV season, where they get a photo of somebody and they can immediately through facial recognition and other means identify the person and what kind of car he drives and everything. Nothing is instantaneous as TV makes it out to be, but there have been advances in technology. Just as there have been changes over the years in the Bureau's priorities. As I said, back when I started, violent crime was a priority, the bank robberies and the fugitives and that kind of thing. And the Bureau has kind of weaned its way away from that. It's funny, it was during that period that the mandatory retirement age was enacted by Congress because the Bureau job was viewed as a young man's job, because it was basically men, although there were a few women at the time. And they thought, well, only the young folks can run down the street and chase after some fugitive and all. Well, that's all changed, obviously, with the advent of cyber criminals and computers and what have you. So the Bureau winds up losing a lot of experience by having such an early retirement age, but it's really going to take an act of Congress to ever change that. But the Bureau's priorities have changed, and after 9/11, Bob Mueller, the then director, basically put a greater emphasis on counterterrorism, counterintelligence over white collar crime and political corruption, and which was still being addressed, but not to the degree that they had been prior. So, I mean, that's probably the biggest change. It's an evolving atmosphere, as it should be. You want to be consistent with the times, and this is where we are, and this is what we should be doing.
Of course, and I'll ask you the same question when it comes to NBC. 13 years across the board there. What changed? What stayed the same?
What changed? I don't know that much did change, to be honest. I mean, because I was sort of there. I mean, I got there not that long ago. So whatever phase they're in, I think I came in that phase that they're still in. So I can't really identify any changes from my time at WNBC, to be honest.
All right, no problem there. And again, this has been a heck of a conversation with you. And this brings us into the rapid fire now. And I thank you very much for your time. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. And the first one is, you can say pass if you want to as well. First question I'll ask you is, either as the FBI spokesman or as a reporter for NBC, what would you say was the most intense press moment you ever had?
Well, the TWA 800, I would think. I mean, you can always say 9/11, but as I said earlier, I wasn't in those initial days. I wasn't really interacting with the media, but TWA 800 was, right off the bat. Again, because there were so many conflicting theories, and of course the victims, the over 200 victims, were a number. I don't know if it was the majority or not, but there were young students. The victims themselves were just the age, the youth. It just added to the tragedy of the whole event.
Besides TWA, case that sticks with you the most?
Well, 9/11. I mean, that's probably not surprising. Having lost the two FBI friends that I had, and a couple since then who developed various cancers and respiratory issues and all that, and succumbed to them. Some of those folks were working at the landfill in Staten Island, and a couple of others were working down at Ground Zero, sifting through the initial the debris and all that. And as everybody was doing that, nobody was really thinking about the consequences of that down the road.
Unfortunately, and you're still seeing people across the board who are down there, first responders from the fire department, police departments, Port Authority, and NYPD alike, and the Bureau, still paying the price, still passing away from 9/11 related illnesses. An NYPD captain just died, and an FDNY EMT just died from 9/11 cancer. So it's still taking. Third question on a lighter note, the rapid fire. When they portray it on television, what's one thing, or in movies too, what's one thing Hollywood always gets wrong about the FBI? You mentioned technology earlier. What else?
Well, the technology is the first thing I would go to. But secondly, at least what I have seen on the TV, I don't know so much about the movies, but the TV side, there are agents that are running around with these outfits with the big three letters FBI on their backs, as they're conducting leads. I mean, they're not even going out on an arrest or some high tension event, which I turned to my wife, who also is a veteran of the FBI. That's where we met, and I look at her and say, "This is so unbelievable." So it's technology plus just the way they portray, at least on these TV shows anyway, the dress of the agents. I mean, gone are the days when FBI agents are wearing fedoras and and white shirts with ties. It used to be said that J. Edgar Hoover always said that if you want to go undercover under surveillance, just take off your tie and unbutton your the top button on your white shirt, and you're undercover. That's how staid we were at the time. But yeah, that's one thing I think that Hollywood gets wrong.
Another thing too, I'm not saying FBI agents, when the time comes and you're dealing with the violent suspect, don't get their hands dirty and throw hands and throw down with some of these guys. But the hand-to-hand combat scenes I'm seeing in some of this, I know. That doesn't happen.
Yes,
that never happens.
No, that's a good point. I mean, absolutely. And I mean, the Bureau tries to do everything over. If they're going to go out on an arrest or what, they try to use overwhelming force. And by that, I mean numbers of people. On some of the TV shows, they have two agents go into the warehouse, looking for the bad guy. When time is not of the essence, I mean, they can certainly round up a whole cadre of support, SWAT people and snipers and all that kind of thing.
Right.
It's just totally ridiculous.
Yeah, we could talk about that all night. Fourth question, the rapid fire, either at WNBC or in the Bureau. Favorite part of the job?
Well, at the Bureau, actually, the favorite part of the job at the Bureau, I would say, is I was kind of in a unique position where when you're assigned to an FBI squad, if it's a white collar squad or an organized crime squad, that's your focus. You sort of have blinders on to what the squad sitting next to you might be doing. In the position that I had, I wasn't conducting these investigations as the media coordinator, but I had exposure to what was going on throughout the whole office, and it gave me a greater appreciation for the work that the FBI does. I think I don't know if that qualifies as my favorite thing about the Bureau, but from my perspective, for the job that I had, I think I was really blessed to have an opportunity to see the Bureau in a broader spectrum than most FBI agents ever experience.
Well said. And finally, given your time in media and your time, of course, in the Bureau, advice for young professionals, trying to make a difference in either field.
Well, on the media side, I think I know the competition and ratings and clicks are the lifeblood of today's media environment. Some people think that that's the key to success, and there is something to be said for that. However, I kind of look at what Jonathan Dienst has achieved over the years by developing relationships,
right,
and fostering a trusting relationship with whichever entity he's dealing with. He doesn't, when he's calling, he's not always calling for the latest tip, or because something has happened. Sometimes he's just calling to see how you are, and to how's the family. You'll never believe what my dog did. That kind of thing. And so I guess what I'm saying is, it's great to be young and energetic and on the go and on the make, but you have to kind of take a step back too and realize that there's more to it than just getting that first scoop. You want scoops eventually, but you're only going to get scoops if you have relationships, if you form relationships over the years.
Yeah.
And on the FBI side, given what's going on these days in the FBI, my advice to young folks is keep the faith and hope that do the right things in the right way for the right reason, and challenge authority when you think that it needs to be challenged. I always remember those first days of the task force concept in New York, where we'd be in the command post with these NYPD detectives, and the FBI agents would be there, and the leaders of the NYPD and the Bureau and the FBI would be up on the upper tier, at the front of the room, and the FBI agents would address the head FBI agent by his first name, which the detectives thought, you can't do this. It has to
Shouldn't
be,
do that.
It has to be sir, or inspector, or whatever. The Bureau is a bit more casual in that respect. It's more of a family kind of oriented thing, and so the newer agents should take advantage of that, and feel that if they're uncomfortable with some assignment they've been given or order or whatever, to at least go and get clarification as to why are we doing this. It's not unheard of to do that in the Bureau, and it should be done.
Yeah. Especially when there's legitimate questions and concerns to be had. Great answers across the board. Great conversation. Before we say goodbye to the audience, stick around. We will talk off air. If you have any shout outs to anyone or anything, as always, the floor is the guest at the end of the program.
No, I guess I gave enough of a shout out to Jonathan Dienst already, so I'm not gonna.
Yes.
I'm not gonna burn him.
He deserves them. That's fine.
Yeah. No, I don't think. I just hope that the Bureau will be able to continue to enjoy the reputation that has been built over the last 50 years in the wake of Watergate and COINTELPRO and all those things that happened 50 and 60 years ago. I just hope that the Bureau's reputation remains untarnished and still commands the respect of the public.
Amen to that. Like I said, stick around. We'll talk off air. As always, a big shout out to everyone who tuned in tonight, and producer Victor, always doing a great job on the ones and twos. Coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, he for a long time was chief of the FDNY Special Operations Command, a big job to have considering the size of the city. Trying to get him for a number of years, finally did. Our schedules matched up in that for volume 72. of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. This Monday at 6 will be retired FDNY Chief Fred Lafamina, who's also former captain of Special Operations Squad 270 in Queens. And next Friday at 6 p.m. as well, he was a former assistant commissioner with the New York City Police Department, had a prolonged career on the street prior to that as well. And that'll be Kevin O'Connor. So looking forward to those two shows coming up, respectively. And John Dienst, if you listen to this, the invitation is yours. I'd love to have you on the show sometime. It'd be great to chronicle your career as well. For those of you listening on the audio side, from their 1980 album, Remain in Light, it's the Talking Heads with Once in a Lifetime. In the meantime, on behalf of producer Victor and retired FBI agent and spokesman Joe Valiquette, this has been Volume 18 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. We will see you next time. Take care, be safe, and have an awesome weekend. Thank you.